responsibilities.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations, Mr Kaiser, on your appointment. Always good to see Queenslanders succeed. I wanted to ask about a court case. A court case in the Federal Court. Judgment was on the 25th of July this year, titled Pabai versus Commonwealth of Australia. Was your department consulted on the Commonwealth's submission to the court in that case?
That's not something I can immediately answer, Senator, but perhaps someone can.
No one?
In short, yes, we provided advice to the Attorney-General's Department, who has the overarching lead on this. And
so they made a submission to the court. I just want to quote to you from paragraph 920 of that judgment from Justice Wigney. Just for context, this case was brought by a group of Torres Strait Islanders who were claiming that the Commonwealth had failed in its duty of care to protect them from the impacts of climate change. Justice Wigney summarised the Commonwealth's position by, and I quote, "The Commonwealth, on the other hand, submitted that it had no control over the risk of harm to Torres Strait Islanders from the impacts of climate change. That was essentially because, in the Commonwealth submission, climate change is a global problem that requires a global solution. It is not a problem over which Australia alone has any or any significant control. While Australia may have control over its own emissions reductions targets, it has no control over the emissions reductions targets set by other countries, and Australia's targets alone are unlikely to have any impact on climate change or the risks posed by its impacts." I'm just trying to understand here then. I hear a lot from the government that we need to act on climate change to solve this issue, but then to the federal court, the position of the Commonwealth is it has no control or any significant control on the climate. Which one is it?
It's a political question. I'll give you a political answer. There's nothing wrong, in my view, with what the judgment says there.
That wasn't the judgment.
Don't interrupt me, Senator Canavan. Honestly, I've been interrupted all morning by Senator Henderson and colleagues. I'll just step you through it carefully. Of course, it is absolutely the case that it is global action, cooperative action between nation states with industry that will determine the outcome, whether it's in the Torres Strait or the Sunshine Coast or Tuvalu or in Vietnam. That is why Australia is engaged in the international. There's been so much criticism from your side of Australia's engagement in the most recent Conference of the Parties. That is why Australia is engaged. We are engaged because we see very clearly, as previous governments had, that it is in Australia's interest for a number of things to happen. Firstly, credible action on climate. Secondly, that the approach in terms of emissions and industry suits Australia's unique position. That is, we have more to lose and more to gain. And that, for example, making sure that Australia's competitive advantages in the future are catered for in the approach that we take on climate action, and that features of the approach that's taken to emissions targets, for example, separating out Scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions in the way that they have, are very much in Australia's interest to maintain. So that's why we take that approach. It is, of course, going to depend very much on international action. That is why Australia's approach under this government has been to support action on climate domestically and internationally. We're not, like we used to be under the previous government, hanging out with Iran and Russia in the sort of isolated position that your approach would make even worse.
Can I just get a very simple answer? It was a very lengthy response, obviously very defensive, but does Australia have control or any significant control over the world's climate?
Well, of course, as I just outlined, small countries make up about 40% of global emissions. Australia, I'll be corrected by officials, somewhere between 1% and 2%. So we're high emitters on a per capita basis, small in global terms. This requires cooperation. That is the truth. Australia by itself, Senator,
I'm just asking
Australia by itself does not determine the global climate. What we can do is take action ourselves, make sure that Australian industry is at the front of the queue for investment, and seek to influence the course of events by taking an outsized approach, I should say, with our friends and partners in the region.
Okay, so we've established that we can't change the climate on ourselves.
No, we haven't established that at all. We've established.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't interrupt you before, Minister. You can have your response after my question.
Don't mischaracterise the response. I know your sort of social media grabs that you want to do are all about mischaracterising people's responses. But what I said was Australia by itself, if it's only about action in Australia, that doesn't work. What works is Australian action together with global action, and it's Australia's job having a government that's actually in the international community rather than a pariah, which is your position, hanging out with Iran and Yemen and Russia and Azerbaijan. It's the pro-Iranian position of the federal coalition.
People just want to know.
Energy policy
people would just like a lower electricity bill, but instead of this rhetoric.
I think people want to see all these things, Senator. They want to see all these things. They want to see lower costs, and they want to see lower emissions. They want to see progress.
We're waiting for you.
And they want to see political parties actually acting in the national interest.
So, just. The statement's been made that we need to work with other countries. I think we can establish that, right?
Well, do you agree with that, Senator? That we need to
yes,
work
I do.
with other countries?
And if you'd like me to expand, I'm happy to come on that side of the table and expand how we would do that under our policy with a much more sensible approach to this. But
sort of Taliban style.
What I want to understand, what I'm trying to understand, given we've established we've got to work with other countries, how has what other countries doing informed our 2035 targets? So in the modelling. Is there been modelling done? Has there been assessment done on what other countries are doing to then feed into what we should do in 2030 or over the next 10 years to 2035?
Yeah, so, Senator, that was a consideration in terms of international action that the Climate Change Authority took into account and provided its advice to government in setting.
What about the modelling? Did the modelling look at scenarios of different climate action?
In terms of the modelling, there's both the Treasury modelling that did look at global trends and what that would actually look like for Australia and our economic prospects.
There was two specific modelling exercises conducted to inform the government's decisions on the 2035 target and the net zero plan. One was led by the Australian Treasury. The other was conducted by CSIRO as input to the Climate Change Authority's independent advice to the government. The Treasury modelling looked at global action consistent with the Paris goal of keeping warming well below 2 degrees and looked at kind of market and other settings that would be consistent with that outcome. And the
just to be clear,
CSIRO...
It only looked at one... the Treasury modelling only had one scenario for global action?
One global scenario, 3 domestic scenarios. Look, because the focus of that work was to inform Australia's pathway to net zero under its existing commitments, which include, as a party to the Paris Agreement, to keep warming well below 2 degrees and its commitment to net zero. CSIRO for CCA looked at a range of international scenarios and, within that domestic scenarios, including keeping warming well below 2 degrees and also consistent with a 1.5 degree outcome. CCA, who is appearing later before this committee, would be able to speak more to that work.
So did any modelling look at whether countries weren't compliant with the 2 degree goal?
The modelling,
other countries, international
Senator, there is extensive range of modelling conducted privately as well as publicly.
I'm just referring
we're talking with respect to the modelling conducted for the 2035 target and the net zero plan. Those modelling exercises were consistent with Australian and global commitments.
Can I just get a clear answer?
So I said Treasury modelled below 2 and CSIRO for CCA modelled below 2 and 1.5.
So was there any modelling done for the 2035 targets to assess whether other countries acted in a way not consistent with the 2-degree goal?
Not by Treasury or CSIRO.
Okay, thank you.
No.
I
would note, however, Senator, that one of the reasons that the CCA sought additional time to provide its advice to the government was to be able to take account of global developments, including the US decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and their advice to the government, which has been published, includes extensive discussion of those factors, which and their conclusion was ultimately that global action and Australia's interests are squarely in maintaining action consistent with the Paris goals.
You would almost say, I would almost suggest there's a consensus right now that that action to date has not been consistent with the 2-degree target. Bill Gates has said that. The IEA released a report recently suggesting that. Are you maintaining that it was not worth, or does the government maintain it wasn't worth to assess the risks to our country of other countries not acting consistent with the 2-degree target, given that there is quite a lot of eminent people right now saying, hey, that's not happening?
So, Senator, I think, and there's more detail on this set out in the net zero plan, but over the course of the last 10 years, we've seen, so prior to the Paris Agreement, global action and commitments were on track to warming of roughly 4 degrees or more by the end of this century. Over the course of the last 10 years, we've seen countries take action and make commitments that have bent that curve down. On current trends, my understanding is that global action is more consistent with something towards 2.6, 2.8 degrees by the end of this century. So over the course of the last decade, the global outlook has improved by more than 1 degree. I think it is very clear, both from international literature and from domestic analysis, that more work needs to be done if the world is to keep warming well below 2 degrees and to keep 1.5 in track. But that's the architecture of the Paris Agreement, which my colleagues could speak to more of, is about fostering and tracking that progress. I'm just mindful I'm not a member of this committee and I'm not a voting member. I need to move quickly, so I'll try and just move on.
Senator, the answer is we've made progress.
Yep.
4 degrees 10 years ago was that would be catastrophic for Australian agriculture, catastrophic for coastal communities, catastrophic for suburban communities.
Can I just, Chair, I'm trying to help the committee because I didn't ask about this.
Well, you did. You asked about what is happening in terms of compliance. And how that factors into
I didn't ask about the effects of it. I didn't ask about this, Chair.
Now we're well below 3 degrees. There is more work to do.
Yeah, thank you. If we could just, because I'm trying to be helpful, okay? I know other senators take priority than me in this committee. I wanted to turn to a specific part of the modelling, the Treasury modelling on page 32. There's a graph there, or chart, they call it 3.14. Suggests that by 2050 we need to get 107 million tonnes of carbon abatement from reforestation. How much land would that take up to deliver that 107 million tonne abatement?
Thank you, Senator. So, if you could just give me a moment. So the Treasury modelling was focused on the economic implications of the transition to net zero. They looked, as I said, at a range of scenarios. They didn't conduct spatial modelling, and so there is no estimate of the land associated with that abatement, but they did work closely with our colleagues in the Department of Agriculture and the Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics, but we don't have an estimate of that.
How can you make a decision that this plan is good if we don't know how much farmland we have to give up to get there? You don't know that. You don't know that answer.
Senator, the scenarios run out to 2050, which
Yes.
is a long way away,
Right.
and the estimates are based on what we currently know with respect to technology and market outlooks. There is extensive analysis that indicates that, by many different sources, that indicate there is cost-effective abatement potential in Australia's landscape. And that includes farmers engaging in carbon plantings as part of their activities.
I get that, but
and if I could just finish, sorry, and also other changes across the landscape. So it's not just on farmland to enhance sequestration. We were asked questions about that earlier in terms of the management of grazing lands, the management of other lands to enhance sequestration. And there are very substantial opportunities across the Australian landscape to take that up at cost-effective levels.
I was just up at Dubbo on the weekend, and there's enormous concern from people about the loss of productive areas in their community. And yes, you're right, farmers will get money and they'll do it voluntarily. Great for them. But the people who work in the town, the businesses that rely on the farm economy, there's not a lot of money in trees. There's not a lot of jobs in unmanaged scrub, which most of this becomes. They don't even control the pests and weeds normally. So how have you modelled the impact on those small farming towns? How have you assessed the impact on those small farming towns if you don't even know how much productive land you're going to take away from those communities?
Well, Senator, there is no... despite what you and your colleagues assert, wandering around farming communities trying to freak people out...
How dare we?
There is a sort of... I don't mind the misinformation sometimes if it's developed here, but when it's imported from overseas, it's pretty difficult. There is no plan.
There's no plan. You're absolutely right. You're right about that. There's no plan.
There is no plan.
You heard it, guys. They have no idea how much land they're taking up. No much jobs they're taking up.
Senators,
no plan.
Senators, sorry, Minister, just for a moment, please.
Disrespect.
No, Senators, Minister, I stepped away from the chair. That was my fault. I was not following the exchange. So I don't know where we've landed on this, but I would just indicate that, once again, this process works better in a question and answer format.
Yeah.
If there are questions and then answers that can be given, that would be my preference.
And I'm
Thank you.
answering. A deliberate effort to produce misinformation in farming communities. I've watched this unfold for a little while now.
Just misinformation. There's no information. This is an example of no information.
The chair's just sort of invited you to let the answers flow before you ask a question. There is absolutely enormous opportunities here for Australian agriculture, and there are absolutely improvements that can be made, as they have been made in Australian agriculture over other issues like protecting topsoil, dealing with the impact of adopting better agricultural practices to improve agricultural productivity. These all work hand in hand. Nobody has been asked to do something that they don't want to do. Farmers under our framework are able to make improvements over time to their agricultural productivity, and that's what I expect to see happen. The alternative is we do nothing and agricultural productivity in Australia hits the fence. Farming communities at 4 degrees under your preferred scenario, which is just we sit on our hands and do nothing. 4 degrees. 4 degrees.
You just said that.
4 degrees.
Well, we can't affect that.
For Australian agriculture is a cataclysm.
Okay, but taking away
and if you want to take the Iranian approach, the Russian approach, the sort of Taliban approach.
No, Taliban support net zero. They're big fans of it.
Just doing nothing. well, what that means for Australian agriculture is a disaster.
Okay.
That's why sensible people.
We get back to the facts
in Australian agriculture.
I've got one more factual question.
The Minister
one more question, just the facts. So when I did question ABARES and the Department of Agriculture about this last time, like you, they couldn't come up with a figure, but they did say that their carbon abatement curves show that you'd expect a range of between 5 and 21 tonnes per hectare of carbon abatement. And so to get to the 107 million tonnes, that means we need at least something like 5 million hectares. Now, that's if we hit the max range, which is unlikely, but even if we were to have to take 5 million hectares out of production, that's not shy of the size of Tasmania. Does that sound about like I can't believe
no,
you
it
haven't
doesn't.
Hang on,
Right.
I haven't finished my question.
Well,
I can't believe you haven't calculated this figure, but is that? I mean, I'm just. It's a logical sort of step I'm doing. They've got those carbon abatement curves. I don't know if you have access to their information. You want 107 million tonnes abatement. That's 5 million hectares, guys. And where's it going to come from? And what does it mean for a small town
it's just dead
who
wrong.
relies on farming?
It's dead wrong.
Oh, okay.
It's
well, tell me how much land it is.
Misinformation, and it's dead wrong. The truth is that there are opportunities on productive farmland every day of the week to make improvements, and many of those improvements that are made in emissions terms actually also mean improvements in output, like actually improving pasture and pasture productivity improves. Just think about grazing.
It's not that. That's a different category. I think you're mixing up the categories.
No.
This is reforestation.
These are. There are always opportunities in agricultural management to improve productivity.
Okay.
And you should just, if you don't want to hang around for the answer, you should go back and keep improving your sort of social media game.
All right.